coming, they didn't want to show up.
Alright, so tonight, Wardy's gonna be a little bit late. At 9 o'clock, he will be coming with a guest presenter. But until then, we have with us a familiar face, Leah Shaffer, Vice President, Senior Counsel at Madison Title and Madison Commercial Real Estate Services. Tonight's class is Real Estate Acquisition and Finance from a legal perspective, all about legalities and contracts and title and all that good stuff. Reverend Wordy asked me to make a request, being that there is a loaded curriculum and not that much time to cover it all, that questions, although they're extremely important and everything has to be clarified and we all gotta learn as much as we can, but we should try to keep things on pace so that we could cover all the content that's meant to be covered, and questions that will bring the class on somewhat of a tangent. Even though it's all important information, you should try to write it down and maybe bring it up towards the end, or at the end if there's not enough time for questions during the class. With that being said, Mr. Shaffer.
Hey guys, glad to be back. How's it going so far? You guys like the presenters were good, right? It's a lot of good stuff. I always feel like a lot of guys like really they know what they're talking about, right? Sometimes I see the other guys present, they're really good. I don't know, I like that. Anyway, following off of what Barry said, I love taking questions. I think it really enhances the class. They asked me specifically to kind of not take as many if possible, but this time I did bring a stack of cards. So, usually I stay late afterwards because I usually present last, but this time I'm not. So, so feel free to take a card and feel free to reach out to me, email me, call me, text me, whatever. I'm always happy to schmooze if I have time. If I don't, I'll call you back. But please reach out to me. I love questions. Ask me questions. I'm always happy to schmooze. Okay, this class is more in my wheelhouse because this is what I do. Like I said last time, I'm a real estate lawyer. My background is I worked at a firm and I did transactions, and then I switched over to title. So this class is going to be both of those things. It's going to be basically my life in the last 10 years or so. So that being said, the first half is going to be about the legal transaction of real estate, meaning how to buy a property. Okay? I always like to say, this is not a substitute for getting a lawyer. This is really kind of just to give you a general overview, a sense of how the transaction works, so that you can, you feel comfortable in it. But you should always hire your own legal counsel. Your lawyer should be doing this for you. So this is something that lawyers need to know. You don't necessarily need to know this, but you'll see as the course goes on. You'll see it gives you a picture of how it works. And I also always like to say, I think I said it last time also, because I'm in-house, I can't represent any of you. So you can't hire me to be your lawyer, but that's actually a good thing for you because it means that if you call me, I can't charge you for my time. So I'm always happy to schmooze. It's free. I can't represent you, but I do have a big network of attorneys that I do work with. So if you do have a deal that you're working on, or you see a deal in the future and you say, oh my God, I don't know who to call, yes, you can call your buddy. You can recommend someone, I'm sure. I deal with real estate lawyers day in, day out. Those are my clients. Meaning my clients are the real estate lawyers that reach out to me with title. So call me, and I'm happy to recommend a lawyer that I like, that I think is good. I'm always happy to make that recommendation. The second part of the class is going to be on title insurance, which is even less relevant to you guys directly. But what I found in my practice is that the more sophisticated buyers of real estate, they're the ones who really understand title, and they really know how it works. And so generally I prefer to deal with the attorneys, but when I'm dealing with a sophisticated buyer and they reach out to me, I can explain things to them, they understand what's going on. So a sophisticated buyer is someone who does know title insurance. So I'm going to touch on what title insurance is, why it's important, what it's all about, why we use it, why we need it, and kind of give you an overall sense of what it's all about. Okay, that being said, lawyers are boring. That's just the way it is. Generally, lawyers are very boring. And I know that. I'm a lawyer. I'm boring. It's generally a very boring thing. Title is boring for lawyers. So title is even more boring. Happens to be, I don't find it boring, that's probably why I do it. I find it exciting, I find it fun. Guys who are in real estate tend to find it exciting. Maybe not the title side of it, but that's why they use me, because I find it exciting. So that being said, I know that this is boring, and I'm going to make it not boring. That's my goal, to make it exciting, to make it fun, and to be able to teach you as much as I can about this. Let's start, it was printed actually a little bit funny. We're going to start on page 10, which is the beginning of the legal side of how the legal transactions of real estate. The way that this outline works is, it's an outline for you guys to kind of use it as reference. It's really for me, so I can present it in a coherent manner. But the way that this outline is organized is generally actually the way a legal contract is organized. So these are the way, meaning when this was put together, it's kind of, the lawyer just went through, I went through the contract, and basically the terms of the contract are pretty much in order of this presentation. So that's where you get these terms. Contracts in general can be in any order, which is also true when I get the question of, well, is it illegal to break a contract? That's like Contracts 101 in law school. It's not illegal to break a contract. There's not criminal law, okay? It's a contract is an agreement between two parties. When you write something down in a contract, if you break the contract, there are consequences for breaking the contract. It's not illegal to break a contract, but you will have to then deal with the consequences of breaking the contract. So that concept applies very, very much within the real estate world of contracts, and we're going to touch on that in a minute. But let's start off at the very beginning. The most important part, right? That's why it's number one. The first part of the contract generally appears in paragraph 1, 2, 3, somewhere at the top, is the purchase price, okay? When you're negotiating a deal, when you're looking to buy a property, then the first thing you're going to do is either talk to the broker, talk to the seller, you're going to negotiate a purchase price. You can do that yourself, directly with the seller. I've seen people negotiate it themselves. I've seen people negotiate it through the brokers. They'll have the brokers negotiate the purchase price and figure it out if they don't want to deal with it directly. And in New York, especially in the 5 boroughs, a lot of times lawyers will negotiate the purchase price if there's no broker involved. If there's a broker involved, it depends on when they get involved, but anyone can negotiate a purchase price. That's one of the most important parts. Number 2, the deposit. So there deposits, again, like I said a minute ago, contracts, everything is negotiable. Nothing is set in stone, nothing is like, well, this has to be in the contract. I've seen people negotiate the craziest things in contracts that I never thought were possible, simply because they negotiated it. Obviously in negotiation, the person with the most power is the person who's willing to walk away. So if someone's willing to walk away, it's very, very surprising when they can get away with to put in a contract. That being said, the deposit it really could be anything. In residential transactions, generally, it's going to be 20% of the purchase price. If you're getting an 80-20 loan, meaning if you're financing 80%, taking a loan for 80%, the other 20% is going to be cash at closing. Usually of that 20%, 10% is given as a deposit at the beginning. Sometimes sellers insist at 10% in the beginning, and then 10% once due diligence is concluded. Either way, again, everything is really negotiable. The deposit is important. Why? So I usually touch on this a little bit later, but I'll do it now. Well, it's what I said a minute ago. What happens if the buyer breaks the contract, right? So the seller is now holding the deposit in his hands. The seller's remedy is very, very simple. He just keeps the deposit. Okay, so if you're buying if you're buying $1 million property and you put down, let's say $100,000, right? Again, this is strict theoretical letter of the law. You put down $100,000 deposit, right? You put down 10% deposit in this example, and the buyer breaks the contract. The seller's remedy is simply to say, see you later, you broke the contract, I'm not giving you back the $100K, I'm keeping it. Okay, I think I gave this example last time where somebody went under contract to buy I think it was a restaurant by the Amazon headquarters that was supposed to be in Long Island City, and he put down a $500,000 deposit. Amazon didn't end up buying the property, and so he figured it's cheaper for him to walk away from the deposit than to go and buy the property and it'd be not worth what he thought it was going to be worth. So he walked away, and the seller kept the $500,000 deposit. So it happens, and that's why deposits are very important. What happens if the buyer defaults, right? So if the seller defaults. If the buyer defaults, it's very, very simple. The seller just keeps the deposit, right? What happens if the if the seller defaults, right? Meaning the seller goes under contract with the buyer, the seller then says, you know what, I don't want to sell to you anymore, change my mind, right? In my practice, I found that generally that happens when the seller finds a better buyer, right? Seller he finds you, you're willing to buy the property for $1 million, he then finds another buyer who wants to pay 1.2. Right, so what does the seller do? He hems and he haws and he says, I'm gonna delay this, I'm not getting back to you, and then he says, I don't want to sell it to you anymore, I have to walk away, right? Usually it's because he's found a better price. So what's the buyer's remedy? Can the buyer do anything? Hey, the seller signed a contract, right? It's not illegal for the seller to break the contract. You're not going to go to jail for breaking the contract. But what can the buyer do in order to keep the seller true to his word, right? That he signed it. He's bound by the contract. So there are a couple different ways of going about it. The most standard way is what's called specific performance. The buyer can sue the seller for specific performance. That means that the buyer can force the seller. This buyer can go to court. He can present the contract to court. And he can say to the judge, hey judge, seller signed a contract to me. Seller's now trying to sell it to someone else, or he's not selling it to me. I had a case a bunch of years ago. It's actually the only time I've ever seen this actually come to conclusion. Usually, lawyers who are usually full of a lot of hot air and big egos, present company excluded, I would like to believe, but usually the lawyers end up just threatening each other, and then it's a big game of chicken, and whoever threatens the loudest wins. So usually the buyer says to the seller, I'm going to sue you. The seller says, I'm going to sue you back. And I've watched these go back from a title standpoint. I watched the emails fly back and forth of the two of them fighting. And usually the seller will say, well, you didn't perform, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do the right kinds of inspections, your inspector's a liar, whatever it is. You didn't, I was ready to close and you weren't. Everyone makes up stories. And then they come, so then they usually end up fighting, and then they figure out some sort of pshara, and they're done. One time I did see it come to a conclusion where the seller refused to sell it. The buyer said, okay, I'll take you to court. So the buyer went to court. The judge says, okay, you have a contract. The judge issued an order for a specific performance, meaning he issued an order forcing the seller to sell the property. How did that actually work? You can't take his arm and take a pen and force him to sign on the deed. How did he do it? Well, the judge appointed a sheriff, the sheriffs are the police for the court, right? The police officers enforce the law, sheriffs enforce the court. So the sheriff can't really necessarily pull you over on a highway, but if you ignore a judge's orders, the sheriff will come and get you. That's how the sheriffs work, they enforce the court. So the judge appointed a sheriff to appear at a closing. I am title company on the deal, and we sent a closer, the buyer showed up, and the sheriff came to the closing, and the sheriff was ready to sign the deed on behalf of the seller. So I basically sent an email to the seller and I said, hey, I have money I'm ready to give you at the closing, right? When you sell the property, you stand to make money. So I'm ready to give you a check at the closing. If you don't come to the closing, property's gonna sell anyway, and then I gotta mail you the check. If you come to the closing, then you'll sign on the deed and I'll give you the check in person. It's your choice. So the sheriff came to the closing, and then nobody knew, but then surprise, surprise, the seller showed up and he signed the deed. But the sheriff was there, and he wouldn't have sold it if it wasn't for the court to force the issue. So that's the buyer's remedy. The buyer can can sue for specific performance. But there is a little bit of an easier way to do this. It's not done by default, but if someone has a contract, right? We're discussing the contract now, but if someone has a contract and they record the contract, meaning they take the contract and they run it over to the clerk's office, the county clerk, and they record it. Again, you don't have to do that. We as a title company can do that for you. We handle all the recordings, so don't worry. Your attorney can do it for you. But if you go and record the contract, right? So now what happens? The contract is on the record, which means it's public for everyone to see. You've now protected your right to the terms of the contract because you filed it publicly, right? Generally, it's not done because why waste money recording a contract? Usually, there's a meeting of the minds. The buyers and the sellers both want to come to an arrangement for this transaction, and they're both happy, and they go ahead with it. It's very rare to have these contract prices. I'm sorry?
What does it cost usually to file it?
$100. It's not a lot. But generally, it's not done. But if someone were to record a contract, then what happens? The next buyer, meaning if the seller found another buyer and he wants to sell it to him, that buyer's title company, I'll get into title later, but that buyer's title company will run a search. They'll find the contract, and they'll say to buyer B, the second buyer, they'll say to him, hey, if in order for us to give you title insurance, you're gonna have to get rid of this contract. And I see these, I don't wanna say relatively frequently, but I've seen them a lot, where we've picked up a contract on the title report, and we'll say, hey, we can't insure this title because there's already a contract for someone else. Happens to be most of the time, they just tell me, oh yeah, that's actually me, I signed a contract in an LLC, and now you have my name, but that's actually my contract, and I'm gonna terminate it at closing. And that's, that's why usually it's not necessarily done. People do it really just to protect their rights. They don't want the seller to run around and sell to someone else. And that's where the title company will find it. But anyway, those are the two different ways of enforcing real estate contracts. Let's go ahead and discuss more of the contract. So I know that, I'm pretty sure you guys had a course on due diligence, right? Right, so I'm not gonna,
Sorry, one question, I know that's what's up. Is it often that when someone's doing an assignment on a property, that it also may be that why it might come up as in contract?
like a flip?
Yeah.
No, usually when they do flips, they don't record the contracts, but flips are totally off topic. I'll talk to you later about that.
What was the benefit of like registering the contract?
So that it protects your right, meaning your right to buy the property.
Like what's a lien on the property?
Think of it, yes, sort of. It's kind of like a lien on the property.
Okay.
If you have a contract, you could always.
So I'll touch on this very briefly. I don't want to get sucked into it necessarily, but if you have a contract that's not recorded, your remedy is to sue in court for specific performance. If you record the contract, you don't have to sue in court. The seller can't sell it to anyone else until you agree. So it's kind of like avoiding the court issue by paying $100 to record the contract. Okay, the next clause in the contract is due diligence, right? You will always want to have, and again, as long as you're using an attorney, the attorney will make sure it's in there, because it's basically malpractice if he doesn't. Your attorney, I'm sorry? Your attorney will need to make sure that there is a due diligence period in the contract, meaning that you will have, and when I say contingency, this is what I mean. If you have a contract that says that you have 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is, to do your due diligence, usually it's 30 days. If you have a 30-day due diligence period, that means that from the day that you sign the contract, you have 30 days to bring in your engineers, your environmentalists, whatever needs to get done to find out if the property is in the right condition. You get that all done. You get your report within 30 days. And again, we have a company that does that, and it generally takes them about 2 weeks, so that's within the 30-day due diligence period. And you can then go back to the seller and say, hey, you gotta fix these things, right? When I looked at the property with the broker, when you showed me the property, my eyes didn't see all of these hidden defects. Now, my engineer told me that they're here, therefore the property isn't in the same condition that you represented to me that it's in. So either you fix it, or I can walk away. Now wait a minute, didn't I just say that if you walk away from the contract, the seller's gonna keep the deposit? The answer is that this is what's called a contingency, right? There are basically 3 contingencies. I'm gonna get to the other 2 in a minute. This is the first one. A contingency means that as long as you come to the seller within that time frame of the contingency, then you're allowed to back out, as long as, again, it's within the terms of the contract, you can back out of the contract and get your deposit back. Okay, so in the case of a due diligence contingency, if you come to the seller and say, hey, I did my due diligence and I don't like it, right? So for commercial contracts, there's usually a contingency that is that the buyer has any reason and no reason. He can back out for any reason and no reason. That's a legal term. Any reason and no reason. Meaning the buyer can just say, my contractor said that there's an issue. I don't like it. I'm walking away. The buyer can even say, I don't like the property. I'm not even going to tell you why, and I'm going to walk away. So generally, with commercial properties, you don't even within the due diligence period contingency, you can back out for any reason, right? Now, why would that?
So what is the contract?
Exactly. So I was gonna say that's the next question. Well, then why do it at all? What's the contract for? And the answer is that generally with commercial transactions, the parties are a little bit more sophisticated, and the guy's not really gonna walk into a contract thinking, well, I'm gonna cancel in 30 days. Like they want to buy the property. So if they're agreeing to back out, they would. I've seen it happen rarely. Will someone will say to me as the lawyer, they'll say, I can't get my financing. I can't. You know what? I got a better deal. I don't like it, and they'll just back out, and the seller has to agree to it. Actually, I had a story. This was a residential property, but residential properties, it's not any reason or no reason. There are usually specific terms. Like you have to get, if you're going to back out, usually you have to present to the seller the inspection report that you get from your contractor. It has to be from a licensed contractor. They have to present it to the seller, and the seller basically has a right to say, well, I'll pay to fix it, and then you can't back out. If the seller says, I'm not going to fix it myself, and I'm not going to offer you the money that it's going to cost to fix it, then you can back out. So residential is a little bit more, because you're dealing with people that aren't as sophisticated, so sellers don't want buyers to back out for no reason, so it has to be like a valid inspection report. I actually had a case, before I was at Madison, I had a case where a guy came to me to buy property, and his inspector went to look at the property, and the property looked gorgeous. It looked like a brand new construction house, it was newly renovated. Turns out that the seller, the property owner, he figured, I know how to do construction, I can do it myself. And he went to Home Depot and he bought all this stuff, and he did this gorgeous looking job renovating his house, right? Problem is he had no idea what he was doing. So the house looked gorgeous. The inspector came in and he looked at, he looked under the hood. He looked at the pipes, looked at different things, and his inspection report basically said the house is like falling apart, right? So what's one example? I'm not a contractor, I don't understand this, but the drainage pipe on the sink used PVC piping, like that white pipe. So maybe you guys know, supposedly like there's like a goo that links the pipe pieces together. There's orange goo and purple goo, and it's like this glue that keeps the pipes together.
Solvent will.
Yeah. So and supposedly one of them is used for water or hot water, and one of them is used for something else. And he used the one that wasn't meant for the water pipe. And the contractor comes in and he says, "You're gonna turn on hot water. It's slowly gonna melt the goo, and the pipes are gonna fall apart." It's just because the guy used the wrong goo to keep it together. He said also the stairs going up to the attic. He says they look gorgeous. A few more people walk on those stairs, they're not supported correctly, the whole thing's gonna fall in. So the buyer was like, "Look, I don't want this property anymore. I came in, I looked at the property, it looked gorgeous. I don't want it anymore. It's not what I thought it was." And he backed out. The funny part of the story is that about 2 weeks later, I got another client who says, "Yeah, I want to buy the property." I looked at the address, it was the same house. So I said to him, "Look, I'm disclosing to you, I know this. I can't tell you who my other client is, but I can tell you that you ran a report and the house is a mess." He says, "I really like the house. You know what? I'm going to bring my contractor in. I'm going to take a look." So he brought his contractor in, and I told him to use the same guy. I'm like, "This guy already did it, so just hire him again." So the guy went in there, and the contractor said to him, "The house is a mess. It's falling apart." He says, "Okay, how much is it going to cost me to fix it?" The guy said, "Anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 to fix all these issues." So he came to me and he said, "Okay, what can you do for me?" So I went to the seller. I said, "Hey, look, this is your second try at selling this house. Everyone's going to know that you messed up, that the house is in terrible condition." I said, "This guy's going to buy the house, drop the price by $26,000, or whatever number I said, and he ended up agreeing to drop the price by $26,000, and the guy bought the house." So again, like I was saying, there's always room to negotiate within contracts. Here, one guy said no, and the other guy said, "Yeah, I'll do it," but he negotiated a better price.
You can only back out if there's a construction problem.
So that's contingency one, is construction, due diligence, environmental. I was doing the property on Staten Island. It was a big industrial property, and there was yellow powder or something all over the property. And the guy brought in his environmental team, and he thought it was an environmental, like one of these Superfund sites, and maybe it cost millions, and it turns out it was just some harmless nothing or other, and they cleaned it up and it didn't cost anything. But the point is, that's all environmental, structural. That's this due diligence. The two other types of due diligence, again, there's different things you could put in, because again, everything in a contract is negotiable. But the two other types of contingencies are title and mortgage. So mortgage is the one that's more well known, right? Sure, you guys know what it is. You buy a property, you say, "I'm going to buy the property on contingency that I can get a mortgage," right? They usually give you 30 days. You can maybe negotiate a little bit longer, but usually about 30 days to get a mortgage.
We're talking more commercial right now, right?
No, this is residential also. This is residential.
Are you saying
Contingency one is the difference between commercial and
you'll know
residential.
within 30 days you can get a mortgage?
With residential,
Within 30 days you'll know?
in my experience, they usually get 30 days. They usually can do it in about 25, 28 days. I usually negotiate, when I used to do this, I would negotiate a little bit more. I didn't like that it was so tight, so I would negotiate 35, 40 days, and if they would push back, I'd say, okay.
Residential usually 90 days?
You could push for 90. Again, everything is negotiable.
But it's not necessary, the bank doesn't need 90 days.
No, people would want, so you're touching on a good point. People like to extend the contingency to 90 days. Why? Because then, if they decide at day 40 that they don't necessarily like the property, and they're borderline with the bank, then they can say to the bank, and this is why it's always good to have a mortgage broker that is on your side, that you know, and you don't take someone else that some other guy recommended. You better to know him. You could say to your mortgage guy, "Hey, look, do me a favor, can you reject me for the loan?" And then you fall within the mortgage contingency to get out. Again, I'm not saying to do anything wrong. He'll find, he could find a reason why you wouldn't qualify for the loan. You can get out. He might say, "Give me another 30 days, another 20 days, and I'll be able to qualify you. But as of now, you're not qualified. I'll send you a rejection letter, and then you can back out of the contract." So again, there's different ways of figuring it out. But commercial also, you know, it depends on how, you know, some guys get hard money loans. I'm sure you guys had classes on loans. You get hard money loans, you get conventional loans, it all depends. Generally, the contingency is 30 days. Again, everything's negotiable. But the point is that if you fail to get the mortgage within that time frame, the seller can't say to you, you have to close anyway. He'll say, okay, then you get your deposit back. I've had clients that were able to pay all cash, and they still negotiated a mortgage contingency, and I've also had the flip side. Guys who didn't have a contingency, and they tried to get a mortgage anyway, and they figured, meaning because they wanted to make the offer better sounding to the seller. They say to the seller, hey, you don't have to wait for a mortgage contingency, I'll close without it. Right? Sellers don't necessarily like mortgage contingencies, because then there's a reason why someone can back out. So he said, no mortgage contingency, I'll close anyway, and then he tried to get a mortgage. I think in that case he actually did get a mortgage, but he said, look, if I can't get a mortgage, I'll pay all cash. It's fine, I want the property that badly and I have the cash. But if I can get a mortgage, I'll get a mortgage anyway, as long as...
Why would a seller say he's gonna close, I didn't get that part again.
Someone has the cash right up front, they can just.
Oh, he paid with cash.
So in that case, yes, meaning if someone's willing to pay all cash. I have a property right now, I think I mentioned it last time, but now we're even further along. I think I mentioned the property right by Central Park. It's a vacant land. So, actually, I was just on the phone with the attorney this morning. The buyers are, I said, when are you guys closing? So they said, probably mid-January time, we need 30 days just to get the funds together. But they said, the buyer's attorney said to me that they're paying all cash for the property. It's like a $5 million property, they're saying, paying all cash, we don't have to worry about it. So, sellers very happy.
What was the second contingency? There was construction and there was mortgage?
Mortgage.
And then
And then, what?
And the next one?
And the third one I was gonna say is title, which is everything I'm gonna talk about in the second part. So the title contingency basically says that if the title company has any, it's phrased a little bit differently. It basically says that the seller has to provide good and marketable title for the buyer. What does that actually mean? It means that if the buyer's title company, comes up with a bunch of messes, and I do have this, I'm a big believer in every title issue can be cleared. And I tell the buyers, I tell the sellers, here's what you need to do in order to clear this issue. And I work very hard on making sure that we can clean up those title issues. Again, I'll get to that soon. But every once in a while, there's some issue they can't clear it. And so the buyer can say to the seller, hey, you can't give me marketable title. For whatever reason, you can't give it to me, and therefore I want to back out. I can back out. So that's the other contingency. If you look at number 4, that's actually what I just mentioned, the title and survey review. One thing to point out is 4A, permitted encumbrances. So there are certain things when someone buys a property that are, you know what, I'll get to it later with title, it's going to be too confusing for now. Okay, deed deliverables. So certain things are delivered at closing. You want to make sure, again, your attorney will do this for you, but you want a copy of the deed. Actually, it just came from a closing in Midtown right before I came here. And there was an issue with the deed, and we had to do another, like a second deed to kind of work out the issues. But the point is, I actually physically handed one copy of the deed to the seller and a copy to the buyer. The original we take back to title because we have to record it, but everybody walks away from the closing with a copy of the deed. Assignments of leases, again, this is more for commercial properties, but you want to make sure that if there's any assignment of leases happening at the property, you want to make sure you have copies of that. Bill of sale, title requirements, permits, okay, all these other types of things that you're going to walk away from the closing with. Not for now, it's too specific. Yeah.
Are we talking about after they sign a contract, they could move out? Or we're talking about just putting down the deposit?
What are you talking about?
Like, they could back out before, what are we talking about? When could they back out after they signed? What?
Yes, so the contingencies that I'm talking about are, if you don't sign a contract, you're not obligated to do anything. You can walk away, you didn't do anything. Once you sign a contract, you're bound by the terms of the contract. Meaning, if you sign a contract to buy a property, you have to buy it, right? What happens if you can't afford it? What happens if the bank comes back and says no? So this will let you back out of the contract after you signed it, before you close on it, because you can't close. So you can get your deposit. The whole point is that you can get your deposit back, right? Again, you're giving the seller $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 deposit. You want that money back. You don't want to just give it to the seller. By the way, I didn't touch on this before. What's the seller's motivation? Why would the seller say, I'm going to keep your money, right? Meaning, obviously he wants the money, but like...
Because they could have sold to someone else.
Exactly, so that's what I wanted to touch on, just very, very briefly. The reason why you go under contracts in the first place is because if you're looking to buy a property, right? So you need time to get your mortgage in order, to get your to get your inspections in order, to get the title in order. that takes some time. If you're gonna put all that time and money, I know we discussed that in the first class, and I'll probably discuss it again, the other costs associated, if you're gonna put money in, you're gonna sink money into costs associated with buying the property, and then the seller goes and finds someone else to buy it, you're gonna say, hey, well, what's going on? I put all this money in and you went to sell it to someone else. So you wanna lock it up with a contract, right? And that protects the buyer, right? But if you think about it from the seller's perspective, the seller has now locked up the property to sell to you. He might be rejecting other offers. Someone might be coming with an offer, maybe even a higher offer, and he's losing an opportunity to sell it to those guys. So his point is, hey, if you're unable to close, and now my property is locked up for 6 months, and I lose another buyer because I told him no, and now he's 6 months later not interested in the property anymore, which happens a lot. He's going to say, now I lost 6 months of being able to sell the property. So he'll say, I want to keep the deposit to cover my costs for carrying the property for 6 months. It's not just money in his pocket. It's actually lost money that the seller has. So that's why it kind of works out for both sides here. Different representations that are included in the contract that it's going to be important. If you're buying, rent rolls are for multifamily and commercial sites. If you have, let's say, a 100-unit apartment building, right? So you want to know what the terms of the rentals are. I know when Arnold was here, he probably spoke a little bit about the lease abstracting. Leases can be very, very different. So we have a company that will kind of do all the searches on the leases. But if you're buying a multifamily property, you want to go through the terms of the leases. You want to know when do the leases expire. This one expires, on this such and such date. This one expires on another date. You want to know what the terms are. You want to know if, who's there, how much they're paying. So that's why the rent roll is important. Contracts also, if you have a contract with, let's say, a lawn guy, right? So if the contract is, excuse me 1 second. If the contract is for a certain term, you're buying the property, you're gonna have to continue paying that contract. So you just wanna know what the contracts are. A boiler company, service companies, trash. And it was actually the closing I just came from. They were talking about, I think the property was in Brooklyn, and it was a 4-family residential. So it was a multi-family residential, and the topic of the garbage came up, and they said, oh, one of the families takes care of it. So I didn't want to push the issue because I don't really care, meaning at this closing, it didn't affect me because I wasn't representing either side. But they were basically saying that one of the units takes care of the garbage for the building. And he said, oh, why did the owner do it? And the owner was like, well, this guy was really nice, he was happy to take care of it. And they said, well, do you lower his rent because of that? And he said, no, he was just happy to do it. So in that case, it was a little bit strange, but again, anything can happen in real estate. In this case, like I'm saying, you just want to know what the contracts are.
As his language, is that enough?
Oh, so as his language is basically, if a property is, if someone is going to buy a property without a contingency, right, then you would put in this as his language, or meaning you're buying the property as is. You're buying the property without without worrying that there might be other things wrong with it. Why would someone put an as is language in there? Is because if someone's buying a property for a knockdown, which happens actually very, very frequently. Someone's buying a property with the intention to knock it down and build up a new one. He's going to say, I waive my contingency, which is very nice for the seller. He doesn't have to worry about it. So I get this all the time, by the way, on title. We'll raise what's called a sidewalk violation, right? So for instance, on this property, the sidewalk when I was walking was very, very nice outside. But if the tree that's outside, the root digs up the slab of concrete, so what happens is that the city comes by, they'll see that the concrete is called a tripping hazard or whatever, and they'll slap a violation on the property, right? Now, we have to make...
in the outside of the property or it's inside the property?
No, the tree outside means the sidewalk has a crack.
So the tree that's in the city's property,
Yeah,
and they're putting a violation on your property.
correct. If the sidewalk is not cleared up, if it's not smooth, the city will issue a violation. And it's your responsibility, the property owner's responsibility to fix it. If you don't fix it, the city has a right, and they put this wording in the violation, I just looked at it the other day, that they have a right to come in and to fix it themselves, and then they send you a bill,
I'm gonna send you.
right? And the bill becomes a lien on the property. And so,
Do you have the right to knock down that tree?
no, trees, that's a whole different story, you can't just knock down a city tree.
Keep the tree and
You gotta hire a concrete company to
No,
come in
but
and fix it.
there are also parks and,
Yeah, that's totally different. It was totally off topic. I'm just using this as an
no,
example.
there's a department. There's
Yeah,
a
Department of Parks,
that-
yeah.
Of parks that's supposed to take care of the trees.
Correct, but once it damages the sidewalk, it's your problem. That's the way the city works. But anyway, the point is that when you have a sidewalk violation, we'll raise it in title. That means that the seller's gotta fix it, right? Buyer's not gonna wanna take the property subject to a sidewalk violation, right? But many, many, many times, the buyer plans on renovating the property anyway. Once he's having his guys come in to fix the property, he'll just have them fix the sidewalk anyway. So the buyers a lot of times will say, don't worry about it, I don't care. And that could also be as is. Okay, covenants, we discussed that, violations I was talking about. Defaults and remedies, we actually already discussed that, I told you we'd usually discuss it at this point, but it doesn't matter. Seller's remedy, like I said, he keeps
What's
them.
number 8 again?
Number 8, it's covenants, different representations that the seller would make to the buyer about the property itself. So he'll say, I have X number of leases on the property, whether it's residential or commercial. I've done strip malls where, there's a Staples and there's a office, whatever, different stores on the property. The buyer wants to see all the leases that are there, Meaning, think of it this way, a property with a Staples on the property is worth a lot more if the Staples lease has another 10 years on the lease than if the Staples lease expires in 6 months. Because it costs a lot of money to find a new tenant to fill that size of space. So you want to go through the leases and make sure that the leases are to your liking and to review them, because if not, and that's what Arno was talking about, he's got the lease review company, because if not, then you could, the value of the property might be significantly less. So again, these are the point of what I'm trying to do now is just to give you a sense of what goes in the contract. You want this item has to go in the contract just so that you know what's going on at the property. You want to know what the value is, and a lot of that is part of the seller's representations. In fact, Arno and I, hopefully he touched on this. Was it Arno? Yeah. The due diligence company, right? So a lot of times the seller will say, I'm asking X number of dollars for my property because of X, Y, and Z, right? Then what Arno does is, he'll come in, he'll have his engineers look at all of his financial guys, his engineers, the lawyers, look at what the seller presented to him, and they'll say, wait a minute, seller, your numbers are all off. Based on what you're sending to us, your property is actually not worth that much. It's actually worth much less. So, so that's why you need to have these covenants in there. You need to know what's basically going on at the property. Again, just touch on it very briefly, the seller's remedy, retention of the deposit, he keeps it. Buyer's remedy, termination and return of deposit, he just gets his money back, or specific performance, he can force the seller to sell the property to him. Risk of loss is also important, just to be aware of. Again, the lawyer will take care of it, but think of it this way. You buy a property, you go under contract to buy a property for $10 million, right? 2 weeks before the closing, there's a fire on the property, it burns down. Okay? Well, the seller's gonna say, hey, you're under contract. You gotta buy the property for $10 million. And you're gonna say, yes, I was under contract to buy the property if there was a building on it, right? Now the property is worth $50,000, or, if it's $10 million, it's probably worth $1 or $2 million, just for the land. So the seller would say, no, you signed the contract, and nothing in the contract says that the contract comes with a building. It just says that the contract is you're buying this address, right? This address is still here, didn't go away anywhere. It's not a hole in the ground. It's just a burned building. So there's always a term in the contract called the risk of loss, a casualty clause. And so that casualty clause will place the risk of loss on one party or another. Generally, the standard way of dealing with it is that the risk of loss is on the seller until the closing, meaning that if the property burns down, then the buyer doesn't have to buy the property, he can walk away. But a lot of times they'll put in like a clause in there that the buyer will only be able to walk away if the damage is less than 10% of the value of the building. Meaning, if there's a fire and it burns down part of the building, right? This actually happened in a building I used to live in. That one apartment burned down and they have to renovate the whole thing. That means that unit, right? The value of the building didn't necessarily suffer because they were able to fix that one unit. So if the value of the building only went down less than 10%, the seller can say to the buyer, you still have to close. You can't just back away.
But does the buyer get a reduction in price?
It might be negotiable, it might not. If a good attorney might put it in there and say, I've seen it. I've actually seen it. It's been years since I've reviewed that kind of contract, but I remember seeing it where it will say that the buyer can't walk away, but he's entitled to an equivalent reduction in the purchase price of the property. It all depends. Insurance proceeds is also part of that because it's actually a funny clause to see, but there's usually in a good contract, it'll say who the carrier is and what, to present as part of the contract the insurance carrier of the seller. Now, why would the why would the buyer care about the insurance carrier for the seller? He's gonna get his own insurance when he buys. And the reason is exactly this. If there is some sort of a casualty on the property, then the buyer might say, you know what, I'm still gonna go ahead, actually I just had this recently on title. The buyer will say, I'll still go ahead and buy the property, right? But you're gonna get, actually I had this in title where this actually happened, and the buyer said, you're gonna get a check from your insurance carrier to cover the loss of damage. But the check is gonna come to you, and I'm buying the property tomorrow, right? So he put in a clause there that post-closing, after the closing, the seller was required, I mean it's obvious, but you have to put it in writing anyway, the seller was required to send the buyer the proceeds of his insurance check. And then it went to the buyer to repair the property. Prorations and adjustments, and we're probably just gonna move on after this. So think of it this way, taxes are due on, let's say, the 30th of the month, right? Taxes are due on the 30th of the month, you're closing on the 15th of the month, okay? So the question is, let's say taxes are due on the 1st of the month, you're closing on the 15th. So now, who's gonna pay the taxes at closing? So we're gonna do our tax search, and we're gonna say that the taxes are paid through the end, through the beginning of the next month. The seller already paid the taxes for the following month. So now the buyer has to get reimbursed, the seller has to get reimbursed for the second half of the month. That's all part of the closing stuff that happens. They're gonna prorate that's why it's on the prorate, number 12 is prorations and adjustments. They're gonna adjust and prorate the amount, and then put it on the title bill, and then they'll adjust, either move money from the buyer side to the seller side, or back, depending on who owes what. Collected rents, uncollected rents, if, actually at the closing I was at today even, the buyer looked at the seller and he said to the tenant on the property, it was 3 units are vacant, there was one tenant on this 4-unit property, and the buyer said to the seller, did he pay rent yet this month? And the seller said, he said, no, I don't know. He said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, I don't know, so they had to go figure it out, how to deal with that 1 month's rent that either was paid or not paid. I don't know how you don't know if the rent was paid or not.
Would it also be split if it was on the 15th of the month?
No, well, yeah, they'll prorate it, right, so they'll give half of it to the seller, half of it the buyer will keep. You guys covered 1031 exchanges yet? No? Okay, so I'm just gonna touch on it very, very briefly because I'm running out of time. But it's important to know for investment purposes. Does anyone here know what a 1031 exchange is?
Yeah.
Some of you do, okay. So I'll touch on it very well, of course you know what it is. So I'm gonna touch on it very, very briefly. If you're buying a property, let's start it this way. You own a property, okay? Let's say you own a property for $5 million, right? The property is worth $5 million, okay? If you were to, scratch that, let me start again. You bought a property, because I'm not a tax lawyer, so I gotta always reset my brain for taxes. It's a very tax-specific issue. You buy a property for $3 million, okay? However number of years later, it doesn't make a difference, you sell the property for $5 million, right? So $3 million of that $5 million was what the property was when you bought it. That extra $2 million, anyone know what it's called?
Appreciation.
Capital gains, right? So what happens when you get capital gains? Our lovely government loves to take the money, and they will tax it at a capital gains rate of whatever the current rate is. But bottom line is you lose a lot of money to taxes, right? So how do we avoid that, right? There are legal ways of avoiding that tax. The answer is Section 1031 of the IRS tax code allows you to do what's called a 1031 exchange. A lot of rules, which I'm not going to get into now, very specific rules on how it works. Suffice it to say, in order for it to work, you have to use a qualified intermediary, meaning you have to use a special company that's just for doing 1031 exchanges. Yes, we have such a company, so if you ever need that, let me know, we'll take care of you. But the way it works is that you sell the property, the money goes into the qualified intermediary, meaning our company will hold that money, you don't get to touch any of it. You then have a certain amount of time to identify a property you're going to be buying. This does not apply for residential. This is only for investment purposes only, rental properties. You then identify a property that you're going to buy with that money. Then you have a certain number of time after that to close. If you miss the deadline, you have to pay taxes. So you have to close within that certain amount of time. Okay? If you close within that certain amount of time, the money goes from the qualified intermediary straight into the seller of that property, right? You've now bought another property. You never touched the money, but you now have another property. And all of that money goes into the purchase price. You now avoid paying any capital gains tax on that property. So the theory is that as long as you keep on selling and then buying and selling and buying your investment proceeds, you can't touch the money, the equity in the building, you can't sell it and keep the money, but as long as you keep it in the building, then you can, you can avoid that tax. So what do a lot of people do? They will put the money into the building and then refinance, right? Because if you refinance, you're pulling out the cash.
That's how you have to pay taxes.
What?
Refinance, you're not paying.
You're not gonna pay capital gains tax. There might be other taxes. Again, I'm not a tax lawyer, so I can't get into the tax, but you will avoid the capital gains tax. You'll cash out, you'll now get your cash. Yes, you'll have to make your debt service payments, you'll have to pay the mortgage, right? But if the property is a property that's producing, value, then you'll be able to pay it from the income from the property.
And you said it's only about commercial buildings? It's only commercial?
1031 is only for investment buildings, meaning it could be commercial, it could be multifamily residential, it could be industrial, it can't be for your own house. I've had people,
Buy a different house for the, so you take.
This doesn't.
Not
but it doesn't
on
refer-
primary home as well?
What?
Primary, on your primary residence? I
it
think.
does not work on your primary residence, it doesn't work on any residence. Meaning if you have a summer home in Florida,
You
right?
sell your house, your primary residence, and you wanna buy another primary residence in another state.
then you cannot 1031 that money. It's not gonna work.
You have a much higher profit margin that you can walk away with without capital gains tax.
That's, I'm not, it's totally off topic, I'm not getting into that.
It does.
Okay, let's move on to title now, because I basically covered all the important points of the contract. The reason why I like to touch on 1031 exchanges is because it's really good for guys who are getting into real estate. You should just know that when someone is looking to sell a 1031 property, right, meaning someone's selling a property, a lot of times if they're 1031ing the money, I just verbalized that 1031 thing, but if you're 1031ing the money, then they have these deadlines they have to meet. So if you're looking to buy a property and someone is a 1031 seller, then sometimes you can get a better deal because they're desperate to sell. Same thing with a buyer, by the way. If you have a property to sell and you find a guy who has 1031 monies, he needs to identify a property within, I forgot if it's 90 or 180, but 180 days. He has to identify the property within that amount of time to buy, and then he has to close. So you can find better deals that way.
Why would a seller be desperate? That's what you want to do.
Yeah, why did the seller do this?
The buyer would be
The
desperate.
buyer would generally be desperate, but you never know. Sometimes on the seller side too, he needs to sell because for whatever reason. I can make up a bunch of reasons, but
We're saying that usually the buyer is more desperate.
usually the buyer is more desperate because he needs to put his money into something.
So you get a buyer.
You can demand a much higher price, and they're willing to pay it just because he needs to. If, I've had guys spend crazy money. I've had someone who's trying to sell a property. No one would pay his price. No one was willing to pay. We were like, "You're crazy. You're never going to get the price that you want for this property." Then he finds a 1031 buyer, and the guy goes, "I'm going to lose more money to taxes than I would by paying for this overpriced building." Right, and then the whole value of the real estate market goes up because prices now go much higher. But that's a whole nother story. Okay, let's talk about title insurance. I'm like out of time here, but let's talk about title. What's title? Why do we need title insurance? What is it all about? I'll give you a couple of examples. Right, you come to the closing, you get your loan, you're ready to buy the property. Closing goes well. You bought the property. Everything's great. That day, you leave the closing, you drive to the property, knock at the door, someone answers the door and they say, "Who are you?" And you say, "What do you mean? I just bought the property. It just came from the closing." And they say, "What are you talking about? I've had this property in my family for the last 50 years. I don't know who you are. I didn't sell it to you. We didn't sell this property. And if you don't get off my property, I'm going to call the cops for trespassing." Right? So that's a crazy story, but it actually happened. I was about to insure a deal. I got cold feet. I had like an underwriter sense of like whether I was comfortable insuring. I said, "There's something fishy here," and I walked away from the deal. The title company that ended up picking up that deal called me 2 days later, and they said, "You are lucky, you dodged a bullet." And they told me that story. This guy closed on the property with them. He then walked to the property. He knocked on the door, and the guy that owned the property never sold it. And the seller was a total fake. The buyer's money went to a guy who then ran out of the country, and the title company suffered what we call a total loss on title. They had to pay the full value back to the bank and to the buyer for a total loss.
I don't understand one second. If there are no public databases or stuff that we have this
Yes, there are.
digitized,
Yes. Let's say you have a property. We did our search. The deed comes back. It's owned by John Doe. Okay? You come to closing. John Doe brings you a driver's license. He says, "That's me." He signs his name. It gets notarized. Everything looks right. Right? The guy's name isn't John Doe, he just has a fake driver's license. I'll give you another story, this is, I love this
But
story.
he looks like John Doe.
Whatever.
No, often that's what you do. You don't look like the guy, you don't have to fake anything else.
Oh, how did I pick it up? I don't, honestly, I don't remember that example, but I'll give you another story. I had a case, a bunch of years ago, where the buyer's attorney reached out to me, and the buyer reached out to me directly, he said, something feels off. I can tell you why he felt off, he told me why, whatever, he went to the door, the guy didn't really know who he was, it was a little bit weird, so he says, get another form of ID. I said, okay, no problem. I said to the buyer's attorney, seller's attorney, I said to the seller's attorney, send me the seller's passport. He said, okay, no problem. He sends me an email, 10 o'clock in the morning, with a PDF of the passport of the seller. I said, great, okay, thank you, everything looks good. At 10:40, 40 minutes later, he sends me a second email. The email only says in it, it says look closely, right? Now, an attorney is not allowed to throw his client under the bus. He has to zealously represent his client. It's a violation of attorney ethics for him to do that. So I know that, and I said, if an attorney's telling me to look closely, I better look closely. So I looked at this.
He is allowed to write look closely, he's allowed, he can write
He
that.
can write look closely, but analyze it. So that's what I did. He didn't tell me there's anything wrong here.
Please advise.
The second email was the identical passport to the first email, but it wasn't the identical file. Okay, it wasn't the same PDF. The file number of the PDF was different, meaning he didn't just copy the same, he didn't attach the same PDF to the email twice. When I opened it up, it was the same passport, but it was shifted 90 degrees and zoomed in a bit. So I knew it wasn't the same scan. It was the same passport scanned twice. So I printed it out, I flipped it, I'm looking at it. The name is the same, well, there's no address, but the name is the same, the dates were the same, the date of birth, the date of issuance was the same, the barcode was the same, the picture, everything was the same. I couldn't figure it out. We passed it around the office, trying to figure out what's going on. Finally, someone found it. One of them said gender M, and one of them said gender F.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
So, yes, you're gonna say yes in today's day and age it's possible, but you still only have one passport. You're not gonna have two passports. So I said it's a fraud. The guy's totally defrauding, it's fake. Make a long story short, a broker saw the property and he said, this is a good deal. He found a buyer who said, hey, this is a good deal, I'm gonna buy the property. The broker then walked on the street, he found the lady, he said, I'll pay you $500, come and sit in the room, just don't say a word. And that's what she did. She went into the closing room, she didn't talk. The closer called me
So who
afterwards.
was she supposed to be? She was just some random.
A random lady off the street, he said, I'll pay you $500, sit at the closing and sign where they tell you to sign.
She was pretending to be the.
She was pretending to be the seller,
Okay.
right? The closer said to me that when it tried to close the first time, the closer's sitting there, and he says, the buyer, he says, now that you told me what happened, he says, there were a bunch of red flags that in and of themselves I didn't think were crazy, but when you take it all together, I realize now it makes sense. He said, the buyer and the seller never talk to each other. I said, okay, that happens. Come to a closing, they're fighting, whatever, they don't want to talk, okay, fine. He said that that at one point everyone left the room except for the seller and him. He said the seller looks over to him and says, do you know when we're going to finish here? Because I got a doctor's appointment to go to. He said, it's not crazy to say that, but if you're making a couple $100,000 on selling a property, you're probably not going to make a doctor's appointment to conflict with the closing. You're probably going to extend your time a little bit. So he said, I didn't call you and say, this is giving me red flags here, I'm concerned. But he said, now that you're telling me that there was a problem, okay, I'll tell you all these things that happened, then yes, it makes sense. Suffice it to say, I didn't close on that deal, we didn't insure that property. But let me just touch on a few more things before we're out of time. I just want to give you a sense of what is title insurance? What are we insuring, right? So I touched on an example of a total loss on title. There's also partial losses on title, right? When we run a title search, what are things we're looking for? Again, I'm going to make it obvious just so you understand, but sellers have mortgages on property, right? Because when you buy a property, you get a mortgage on the property. So property owners have mortgages. When you buy the property, you don't want to buy a property with the seller's mortgage on the property, right? That's obvious. You want to buy the property, what we call in the legal world, free and clear of all liens. You want to make sure that there's no liens that will encumber or hinder or hurt your ability to own the property, okay? So what we do is we run our searches, we'll find the mortgage, and then we'll say, okay, we're gonna pay off the mortgage prior to closing so that you get free and clear title. Why do I use that dumb example? Because that example is something that everyone can understand, and it's very obvious. There are many other types of liens that will affect the property in the same kind of way, and we as a title company will find them. So whether it's judgments, mechanics liens, ECB liens, many different types of liens, that I'm not gonna get into right now, but they will affect the buyer's ownership of the property, and they are what we might call a partial loss on title, right? If, let's say in my other example, the mortgage isn't paid, right? Someone buys a property and the mortgage never gets paid off, right? So it's not a total loss on title, he still owns the property, but the mortgage, which is probably less than the value of the whole property, still has to get paid, right? So that's a partial loss on title. How is title insurance different than, oh, and the other thing that title insurance does is we also make sure that the person selling the property, that the person that's supposed to be selling the property, the person that's signing on the deed is actually authorized to do so, right? So in my example of the fake passport, that's obvious, right? But what happens when you have a corporation or an LLC that owns property? An LLC doesn't have 5 fingers in a hand, they can't sign anything. So we go through the documents and make sure that the person that's authorized to sign on behalf of the LLC is actually signing on the deed,
Just
right?
why would someone have this problem if you do the real due diligence the way you're supposed to be doing it, then why should the way?
Well, we do that due diligence, meaning we as a title company, that's what we do. We do the title due diligence. Due diligence for a property
Why would
is,
someone be up to closing already when, you know, and if you did the due diligence before, you know who the person living there.
oh, no, when, okay, so let me back up. When you sign the contract, literally that day, the attorney then sends me an email, he goes, Ez, here's the contract, please order title. We order title day 1. We could get title done in a week, 3 days. A day, but don't tell anyone. We can do it pretty quickly. Push comes to shove. But yeah, meaning that's why I say the title contingency is less known, because we work very quickly. We'll get it done quickly, and it's not going to hold up closing. What happens if the person that owns the property is dead, right? So now the deed says that Jane Smith owns the property, but Jane Smith is dead, right? Who's going to sign on the deed? Well, that opens up a whole other legal can of worms. Who are her heirs? Was there a will? Was there no will? Was there an administrative proceeding? Was there surrogates proceeding? We do all of that. I do all, meaning I'm familiar with. That's what we do. We'll find the right people, the heirs, to sign on the deed, so that it allows that no other heir is going to come forward. And I actually had a case like this once where I did my due diligence. It took me like a week. I had a whole family tree written out of this crazy. It was crazy. The guy was married to 3 different women, not at the same time. Yeah, that kind of thing. One of the kids was in prison. It was like a spaghetti and meatballs family tree that made no sense. I puzzled everything out. I had about 12 different heirs, and I said all these 12 people have to sign on the deed. The seller says no problem. The attorney will get everyone to sign. 2 weeks after closing, and I was so careful. I had literally everything written out. Normally we require 2 heirship affidavits. I'm not going to get into that. I got 4. I was very, very careful on my underwriting. 2 weeks after closing, an attorney calls me and he goes, "My client never got the proceeds of the sale." I said, "What are you talking about? We did it properly." So he told me the name. I said, "She's not an heir. She's not supposed to be getting any money." He goes, "Well, look, she's calling me. She's ready to pay me money to hire me to fight it, and so I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it." So I said, "Your client's wrong, but okay." So we put in the claim. He put in the claim. We went to the underwriter. The underwriter tried blaming me. They said, "Oh, agent error, you messed up." I said, "I did not mess up. I was very, very careful on this one." And the person was suing for, the reason I'm giving this whole example is because it's a partial loss on title. This was a 1/13 portion of this property. They were claiming $50,000 of a whatever, it's like $1 million, whatever it is. They only want $50,000. In this example, the underwriter said, "You know what? It's actually more worth it for us to just pay this person out than to have to fight it in court." Oh my God, it ripped my heart out. I hated it. I was like, that's so annoying. She got $50,000 for lying. But that's the way
She
it was.
wasn't a real heir?
No, I was confident she wasn't a real heir.
You
I
don't know
didn't. Because I had 4 different people. I had a pastor, I had a neighbor, I had like the priest, I had like some distant relative. I had 4 different people say that these are all the heirs, and they had everything listed out. She comes forward. I said, "You're right. You're right." So the underwriter paid out.
Isn't she supposed to
Does
fight
she have
with
to
her
prove her
siblings?
position?
Shouldn't she fight with her siblings, not with you?
Well, she came to the title company. Yeah. I just want to say one more thing, and then I'll stop. I'm out of time. I just want to just so you understand how title works differently from every other type of insurance. I always like to make sure I bring this up. So just to anchor it in what you're familiar with, right? So health insurance, car insurance, life insurance, every other type of insurance works the same way. How does it work? Let's use health insurance as an example. You pay your premium on the 1st of the month. If something happens on the 15th of the month, the insurance company will pay out, right? They have no way of knowing if there's going to be an issue. They have no way of knowing if you're going to if you're going to go to the ER hospital, if there's going to be, your kid has to go to the whatever, you have to pay out. They have no way of knowing that. There's no due diligence that they can do. Either something happens or not. and you pay your premium at the beginning of the month, it covers you for that month, right? Car insurance, same way, you pay your premium, you hope you don't get into a car accident, if you do, they pay out. Title insurance is exactly the opposite, okay? We will only insure property if we're confident that there won't be any issues, right? So you order a title search when you go under contract, we're gonna do all of our searches, all of our due diligence, we're gonna clean everything up so that there are no liens by the time you get to closing. You pay your premium once at the closing, and it covers you backwards, doesn't cover you forwards, it covers you for if anything that we missed, anything that happens before closing, right, and then something happens and it comes up that we missed something, then we'll pay out afterwards. But it doesn't cover prospectively, meaning if a buyer buys a property, 2 weeks later he gets a judgment put against him, the judgment attaches to the property, then he calls up the title company and says, hey, 2 weeks ago I bought the property, I got title insurance, I want you to cover me. We would say, yeah, that's ridiculous. You got the judgment yourself, you put it on the property, it was after closing, it's got nothing to do with us. So that's what we do. We'll do the searches backwards, and we'll make sure everything's clean, so that at closing, you convey good and clean title.
Question?
Yes.
Is the title insurance, when you pay the title company, is that a percentage of the cost of the property, or is it nothing to do with the cost of the property, it's just usually a set price, or?
So that's a good question. Title insurance is a function of the purchase price, or if it's a loan, it's a function of the loan amount. It's not like a strict percentage, so I can't tell you, oh, for $1 million, it's this much money. What I can tell you is that no one really, it's not easy to do in your head, but there are calculators that do it for you. So I don't mean this as an advertisement, but just go to MadisonTitle.com, there's a calculator on the top. Just type calculator, put in title calculator, you punch in the price of the property, and it'll just spit out what the title premium is.
What's the range of percentage?
Usually the rule of thumb is about, I don't know, 1 to 3%.
Right, okay, so that's what I thought about. What's the website again called?
MadisonTitle.com.
Madison.
How long does it last, the title, so long as you have the property?
So long as you own the property. Okay, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys, like I said, if you have any questions, here's my card, please give me a call. I'm always happy to schmooze.
That is,
Thank you.
one of the best.
If you have any deals, call me first. I'll talk to you about whether
Like
it's.
for the last course, you were the first teacher. It was a great teacher. I would tell you, if you're not in the rush, if you're not in the rush in 20 minutes when we end, you could.
I actually am heading to a closing now.
Oh, okay.
As weird as it is, I'm heading to a
Okay.
closing.
All right. So,
Thank you for your
in
Thank you very much.
our quest to make this the best course that you ever took, so we're honored to bring you some special guest speakers to share with you a little bit of their real life experience. So I want to call up actually a close family friend. The Wordys and the Langs go back 40, almost 40 years. I grew up with RE Lang, who's the Shliach in Camarillo, California. He's my classmate in Russo and close friend, and I've been hanging out by the Lang family home for many years, and I know Shmuley and Nussin Lang for many years, and Shmuley and Nussin together started a Lang Realty. So you might have seen some of their signs around, and they have two sides of their business. They have a brokerage side with the rentals and the sales. They also were involved in acquisitions, and so I had the Tashkach Pratis, but Knesset Shluchim. We sat at the same table by the banquet, and I thought to myself this would be an excellent guest to come bring. So I asked Nussin if he would do it. He said yes. So I'm honored to have Nussin come up. He'll share a little bit of his story, and he'll take some of your questions. So, Nussin.
Thank you.
Uh,
Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. My name is Nelson Lang. I want to start by thanking Rabbi Wardy for allowing me to share my experiences with you tonight.
Now flip over the
So-
paper. Take the paper, flip it over.
So when I was 20 years old, my brother and I in the back over there started Lang Realty, rental company, which still operates today. Much of my experience in the rental business gave me the foresights and skills to jump into the investment side of the business. The relationships I formed with the owners in the early years of my rental business are some of the loyal relationships that I and my brother have today. What I realized along my journey is the importance of integrity. Your loyalty and honesty in these relationships are priceless. These relationships can be underestimated or undervalued, as they're key in building the future in business, in any business, but specifically real estate relationships. Another important aspect of growth in real estate is having a mentor, someone wiser than you, with some more experience than you, who can see things objectively. I recall when I was 25, a colleague of mine purchased a piece of land to develop without consulting anyone due to fear of losing the deal. We call it FOMO, I guess nowadays. The result was that he overpaid and got into trouble. It's very common in the business that people don't want to discuss a deal because they just want to, make sure no one else hops it. And it's very important to discuss it, at least at the beginning, to make sure that you don't get taken for a ride. When confronted with difficult crossroads, especially in the beginning stages, I can't stress enough the importance of asking advice to someone with more experience in it. Moving on to the current markets. As of now, we have a portfolio in New York of rent-stabilized and free market apartments that have been purchased both with syndicates and individually. Over the last year, with depleting cap rates and of course the terrible new rent-rated laws that went into effect in June, has caused lots of investors to flee New York. Since then, we've been very selective in New York properties. We've started looking outside New York. We recently purchased a few properties out of state with local partners that have experience in those markets. Being a small shop like ourselves, it is crucial for us to partner up with people who have established infrastructure in the local markets and have their feet on the ground. Many people go into these markets without proper experience or local knowledge of the area and can get into trouble with high vacancy rates and careless third-party management who have no skin in the game. While I don't think New York City is a very promising place at the moment, I do believe strongly that politics, markets, and market trends have potential to change, and I don't think the new regulations are sustainable for the very long term. I still think there's opportunity as the market has dropped substantially. Like Warren Buffett says, and I quote, "You make most of your money in a bear market, you just don't realize it at the time." New York City market has been down 25 to 30% in the rent-stabilized assets. There's still hope, and New York City will forever be the land of opportunity and growth. I just want to conclude with a little Talmud, just for Rabbi Wardy. It says all beginnings are difficult, and it's going to be tough out there, but don't give up, and I tell each one of you the opportunity, each one of you guys have the opportunity to achieve greatness and be very successful. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, so before the
Yeah.
questions, so now, that was a very impressive, very well prepared, thank you.
Okay. Now,
So now Tachlis.
Tachlis,
I'll-
let's talk markets a little bit. If you want to ask some questions.
Just,
Yes.
here's my question to you.
Go.
Your first deal,
Yes.
tell us your memories of how that went.
Okay. Well,
This is what most
my
of these
first
guys
deal
here, they
was
want to do their first deal.
was a house on Eastern Parkway. Someone brought it to me. Actually, my brother Kobe. I have an oldest brother, Kobe, and he brought us the deal. And my brother and I saved up some money from the rental business. And at the time, I think we had about $150,000 saved up together. And we got a regular loan for like 75% financing, and we had to take another loan on top of that with a little higher financing. We bought our first deal.
Single family?
It was a multi-family. It was two-family. So it was two. It was.
Can you explain that in the loan you have to take on top of the loan if you're?
Well, it's like a mezzanine debt. It's like some mortgage companies, when you go to certain banks, they give you a second loan
Yeah.
at a higher interest. It's higher risk, so you can pay a little more. Let's say, for example, we were paying 4.5% on the first loan,
Right.
and the second loan, which was a smaller loan, we were paying about 6.5%.
You still do that today, if you got a second loan?
You could still do that, and you could still do that. It's obviously a higher risk, and you pay a much higher interest rate. And those things are very highly leveraged, and you got to be very careful because your monthly payments will be very high. So people do that, tend to do that in more of a short-term, style deal. I'd say for long term, I wouldn't advise it.
What about the property made you want to put like all your savings into this deal and put everything on the line?
Well,
what struck out?
Well, good question. I think when you start out, you have to take some risks. I felt it was a good deal, and we liked the location that it was at. And since we were in the rental business, we understood the rental market very well. I was able to consult with some owners that we dealt with. And at a certain point, yeah, you save up money. You gotta if you want to get in the game, you gotta just
Enjoy it. What do you like? You looked at the comps and then like what else?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we knew the area very well. Like I said in the speech, I feel like if you're on the ground in areas like, especially now that we're investing out of state, it's crucial for us to go invest with people that are on the ground. We were on the ground here, already, running a rental business and had lots of connections, and we felt that, we felt that we really knew the area and it was a good calculated risk for us. Just like we wouldn't do a place, I wouldn't just go to Kansas and just buy in a place without really knowing what's going on. So I feel like if you have to really learn an area, stay focused, and then you can make a move, or partner up with someone that really knows the area well.
Where do you go out of state?
So we've been to Maryland. We did a couple of deals there. We did something in Connecticut, and we're looking at something a very big deal out in Illinois now as well.
How did you learn about the area? What did you?
Well, we've sort of partnered up with people. My brother has a family member in one of the places, and we trust him. I think trusting the person that you're partnering up with is very important. So we partnered up with a family member of his, which
You get along together?
Sorry.
You guys bought it together?
Yeah, we bought it together, and so we do joint ventures. Sometimes I'll even invest with someone on the ground there. So we're open to anything, but very important for us that someone has the knowledge of the local area, because you can end up in real trouble if
So
not.
how much did you learn about the area and how much did you rely on?
Well, what we do is I'll walk you through the last deal. We went to the place, we took a tour of all the buildings. It was 144 apartments. We toured all the apartments, we went through all the numbers, and we went through the management. We met the managers, the management company, did our due diligence on everything, and then we decided to go ahead with it.
So you did your due diligence on that building, but the area itself.
Well, the area, we do due diligence on the area as well, but it's very hard. The issue is when you go to a new area, I mean, just for example, if you're from Crown Heights, right, you could be on Utica or on Franklin Avenue, so it's very hard to look at comps when you go to, especially when you go to a city, the prices could be, 50% more 8 blocks away. So it's very difficult to look at a comp from 3 blocks away and really, if you don't really know the area very well. So either you can go and actually sit in the area for a long time and really learn it well, or you can partner up with some people, so.
The first building that you bought, do you still own it?
Yes,
So you rent it out?
yes,
So after you took out your first loan,
yes,
so on top of that you took a second loan,
correct.
and then you had to clean the place up and get it rented out?
Yes, what we did is actually,
So how did
we
you
made some
do
more
that?
money in our business. It had to be this specific property. We made some more money in the business.
Because it's a lot of money you gotta have just to get the ball rolling.
Right. I mean, it was about $150,000 at the time, so,
It was a loan to cost or loan to value?
there was a loan to value,
Okay.
yeah,
So there was other money that you had to put in yourself on
Yes.
top of that?
yes.
How much construction?
We didn't really do construction there. It was basically turnkey. We actually did something on the top floor, but not too much. So it wasn't like any full renovation, gut jobs, or anything that we needed a lot of experience for. And we learned a lot from that, actually.
So your rentals covered your mortgage?
The rentals covered the mortgage, and eventually actually we had some more money, and we paid off that second loan, that small little second loan, which was like a 6.5% rate at
And
the
you
time.
can focus on another building.
Yes, so we focused on another. And then the next property actually that we bought was, more the multifamily. We bought a 7-unit building in Brooklyn.
How long later?
That was, it was a long time after. I would say it's about 2 years after.
Do you refinance?
And then we really started getting into the business from there, and the market grew, and the rental market is, went up substantially. We were buying rent stabilized buildings. People were moving out, and we were able to turn over the apartments and increase the rents and get much higher values. Go back to the bank, refinance the properties, and go on to the next deal. That was our model for a while.
Did you take investors for any of this, or?
Well, we started out, we first were not taking any investors. We were doing everything sort of mom and pop, just me and my brother, and from savings and from refinancing, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes we brokered deals because we were in the market at that time. We knew a lot of owners from the rental business, so we had a very good network, and we were able to find deals and broker it to them as well. So we made some money from that, and we were able to put that into deals. And slowly we started building up to bigger deals. And when we hit a certain point of where we wanted to really grow, I would say probably around 2015, we started taking investment money, which comes with challenges as well. So,
What mistakes did you make in your first purchase that you've learned from that you wouldn't do again?
well, I'll tell you actually, the first purchase, I think we bought at the peak of the market. We bought it in right before 2008, and market was peaking, and what we did is we actually panicked right about I would say probably 2009 or 10. We panicked actually, and we thought, listen, this is our only asset. Let's sell it. The market's tanking, And we went into contract with somebody to sell it, and actually, thank God, we were gonna sell it for, I think it was $850 or something.
At a loss?
840. You know, we were gonna make a small profit, but we were all we were scared. Like this was our, at the time, this was our most of our money, our bulk of our money was stuck in here. What if it went down to 600? You know, we lose our pants. So we decided that we were gonna put it on the market. We put it on the market. We got an offer which we thought was great at the time, and I guess thank God they couldn't close for some reason. We pulled it off the market. I would say today it's probably worth about 1.6, 1.7. So it was just an experience, like not to panic in a bad market. As long as you're covering your mortgage and things are going well, I would say, try to leave it alone if you can. Don't panic about markets. Listen, there's nothing wrong with selling something and doing a 1031 exchange. I heard him talk a little bit about that before. Taking something and actually, going to something larger or something better if something's maxed out or you don't see any growth left in the property.
How about now to stabilize the apartments? Now that the apartments are so much cheaper, you don't think it's worth going?
Right, so like I was saying, the markets are down in the rent stabilized buildings about 25 to 30%. So there's definitely a huge opportunity. However, I will tell you, for someone that's starting out in the business, it is a very difficult area to get into because it's very heavily regulated and very complex as well. And if you really have the experience in it, I think it's very difficult to get into. I think it's easier to get into the 3, 4, 5 family business or the non-stabilized business just for starting. Or, if I could suggest maybe working for a management company and learn a little bit about the rent stabilized buildings, get some knowledge there.
Your recommendation for a 3-4 family, is that in New York City or?
Well, I think New York City right now, the 3, 4, 5 families haven't really got hit as much because they don't have the regulations, but people are still definitely fearing New York City as a whole. So I think it did come down a little bit as well.
Hasn't that maybe raised the prices of other properties because people are pulling the money out, looking to invest into other properties now, and now there's more of a demand for other kinds of
In New York, you mean?
Yeah.
I would say yes. There is a higher demand definitely in the non-stabilized, but I think people are really afraid of New York at the moment. So I don't think it definitely has not raised prices in the non-stabilized assets, and I think if anything it went down a little bit. I think a lot more people are actually, that money that was buying stabilized have gone out of state. And I think that's really where.
It's probably going to affect the rent all over, even the non-stabilized. The rents are not going to be able to go up. If all the buildings, rent are not going up, so also the houses are going to have a hard time going up in rent.
Well, I think the opposite in a way. I think the non-stabilized apartments can go higher because of that. What happens is rent stabilized apartments, people stop building, people don't move anymore because they have a low rent stabilized, and what happens is, the free market apartments become very high value because there's not a lot of inventory. People aren't going to build anymore with all the new laws. So what happens is the non-stabilized apartments end up, the rents do increase over time. And that's why most economists are very against it. They say, overall, what happens if you get lucky and you get a low rent stabilized rent, you're in great shape. But if you don't end up getting one, you'll end up in a regular apartment, which will increase over time.
Pushes people out, basically.
Yeah, which I'm saying, as a renter, the rents will rise.
Not against you. No.
Yeah, and people don't want to do business here. I mean, listen, there's so many other aspects that New York City is losing because of these new laws. I mean, every time you buy a building, I don't know if you guys learned this yet, but there's transfer tax, there's mortgage tax. The city makes money on these things, and there hasn't been a lot of transactions because people aren't selling buildings because they're 25-30%. People aren't buying. People don't want to sell. No one wants to sell when something's 25-30% below market. So that is, that affects the city a lot. And it sounds great, to give people low rent and to regulate things, but ultimately, every economist, will say that it's just not good for the economy. So that's why I don't think the long term, I don't think this could survive long term.
If you look at downtown Brooklyn, they're still building skyscrapers that are like residential or whatever.
Right.
So how's that like?
Right. So right now, I mean, there are certain ways to build with giving affordable housing. There's certain ways to get part of it. But still, it's very difficult, and they want to eventually go after all free market apartments. I mean, that's the goal of a lot of these, the new state centers that are.
What do they explain that? They want to go after full free market.
Well, it's being proposed. I mean, that they would like to have all free market apartments be rent control. I don't know if they'll do stabilized. Stabilized is different than rent control. Be capped at an increase. Like in Oregon, for example, they did a 7% increase cap on residential.
Annual.
Sorry, annual. Yes, annual. So they're looking for something like that in New York.
They have that thing in Canada, something like that, it's like you do like a, it's like a
Right.
2% increase, something ridiculous, right?
It makes sense. They had it in Los Angeles, and they just signed a bill, I think, that California is statewide as well, rent control.
And what do the economists say, like, what's the downside of having that? All free market apartments is capped.
Well, they feel that it brings down the values a lot. Well, you know, a lot of them, you know, if it brings down the values, automatically property tax goes down because the values are down, so they'll lose, you know, the state people, yeah, they lose money on property taxes and whatnot. Many things that
might follow, no? States might follow.
Yes, there's a lot of states that may follow, and that's definitely a fear nationally. I mean, a lot of them, the Democrats wanna bring that into the, you know, nationally. Definitely the red states, I mean, if you look through what the hottest areas now are, it's 3 of them are in Texas out of the top 10, just because it's a red state and, you know, much more landlord-friendly laws and, you know, less regulated. So there you see that, you know, that the growth is in the, non-regulated.
Connecticut has very good laws, but.
Yes, Connecticut has, I mean, right now, there's no rent control or anything in Connecticut.
You can also throw people out.
Yeah, yeah, it's very easy, most places it is, I mean, here it's a nightmare, you know, to get, you know,
To evict.
to evict could be a nightmare, it could be a year of back and forth to try to get
It's generally about 4 to 6 months, no?
well, 4 to 6 months would
6
be,
to 12.
it means you have a lot of mazel, yes,
Oh, really?
unfortunately.
Connecticut's like what, 30 days you can get?
Yes, some of them, there's even a state, I think, I'm not sure which state it is, but one of these states in middle America, it's a crime not to pay rent. So if you don't pay rent, then they put you in jail, like the old ones.
What's the best place for someone who's looking to buy an investment or a commercial property? What's the best place to go to look for these kind of deals? What kind of resources? How do you find deals?
Well, I mean, I've been in the business for a while, and I have a network of people that, you know, brokers. I feel like the off-market deals are, you know, see them much less now, especially with, you know, with technology and everything. I don't think people are naive anymore that you knock on doors and buy properties. It does still happen, and I just don't think that's a great tactic nowadays, and I don't think it's, you know, putting your time to good use. I mean, I get these calls all day from people, oh, you're selling? Usually like an Israeli accent on the other side.
So what is the best place for someone like us to go find deals?
I would say if it should be somewhere close. If you're gonna buy something small and you wanna operate and manage it should be somewhere close that you can get to, and oversee it, I think, is very important.
You have some questions from the back.
Oh, sorry. Okay, catch it in a second, sorry. So I think that, I think going to a place that you can get to easily, you know, it's very hard to hire a management company and to oversee a 2-family, you know, or a 3-family that's just too far away for you to get to by car within an hour or two. So I think staying local, find something that, you know, that can make a decent return on your money and possible growth. I think at the beginning of, you know, of investing, I think it's important that you see growth because, you know, once you hit a certain point, I think the return, you're just looking for, you know, returns are more important, but I think at the beginning, it's very important to see some growth in the area that you think, or something that you can add to the building in value, you know, whether it's renovations or, you know, splitting up apartments or, you know, taking a 1-bedroom, making a 2-bedroom, etc.
Where do you find them? Do you go to brokerage companies?
Yeah, so brokers reach out to me. Most of my buildings I bought recently, I bought from brokers that, you know, some of them are mom and pop shops, some of them are work for corporates, yeah. I mean, when I first started out, there was a lot of off-market deals. People were knocking doors and being, you know, off-market, still hate, don't tell anyone, make the talk, but it's not so common.
Sorry, did you say one thing about Los Angeles? What did you say that they signed in the bill?
They signed a bill in, it's California state law. It used to be local just for LA, and now it's statewide.
And that is
I think it's 5% cap, I believe.
Annual cap.
Annual cap.
Control.
Yeah. Sorry.
The first property was 2-family, your second was 7, so
Yes.
there was 2 different types of loans, residential, commercial?
Yes, we actually, yeah, there's 2 different type of loans. Yes, we bought it as a residential in our personal name with 30-year amortization on the first loan on the 2-family, and then when we bought the 7-family, it was a regular 5-year, you know, commercial loan with a different kind of bank.
What was easier to handle? What was the difference between those 2 loans?
I think it's easier to get a residential loan usually what happens is, I mean, if you want to buy it not as a non-owner occupier, it's easier to get a residential loan than a commercial loan. A lot of commercial loans, the problem with getting into it is they want to see experience, they want to see like a real estate schedule, that you have experience. So that can be challenging to get into the business of the multifamily business. So sometimes, you could partner up with somebody that has the experience and they can underwrite the partner, with
Two
kids.
families not considered experience?
The two family, I mean, it's not gonna be as much experience, to get it. I mean, it depends on the size of the loan, obviously, but.
You don't need experience for two family.
No, you don't. I mean, most of the time, if you go, you'll pay a higher interest rate. If it's non-owner occupied, you pay a higher interest rate. But as long as the rental will cover the mortgage, most of the time they'll be okay with it.
If you were starting from scratch now, you're looking at maybe an FHA loan, you live in Crown Heights, you work around here, I'm talking about myself.
Okay.
And you're looking to do an FHA loan around, right?
Yeah.
Again, you can't buy here, it's too expensive, you wanna start with a residential loan.
Right.
And, everything is a challenge, so for example, on your first deal, it's hard to get an investor, it's hard to
Right.
get commercial because you're not.
Yeah.
Where would you start from?
Well, I think it's very hard. I mean, if this was, a couple years back, I would tell you to hit the field in New York. So it's been a great market the last 10 years, since I started at least, it's been growing and it's been a great market. Obviously now, I think New York's a very tough time. And, listen, I think it could be opportunity. I have just a very, bad taste in my mouth about New York now, so it's very hard for me to tell someone to go out and start real estate in New York. But I still think there's opportunity. We bought, we bought something for, on Franklin Avenue, we bought something for 1.43, and it was a 4-family, and we were able to sell it after for $2 million a few months later. We found a good opportunity, and things that some guy that needed a rush to sell his property, and we were able to.
31?
From there, we did a 1031 when we sold out. Yes.
You put the ball on it?
Yeah, we had ended up taking, by the time we went into contract, by the time we finished closing with the guy, it was almost a year. So we were able to do a 1031 exchange. Yes.
Isn't it 6 months?
I mean, it's supposed to be around a year. There's no actual. It's supposed to be a long-term hold and not a flip to do a 1031. So most attorneys tell you it's about a year if they want you. If you want to consider it a long-term hold and do a 1031
Oh,
exchange.
in order to get a 1031.
Yes, you can basically, you can't buy something and then close on it, flip it the next day tomorrow, and then do 1031 exchange. Has to be considered, I mean, this is accounting stuff, but it has to be considered a long-term hold in order to.
You need a minimum hold in order to do
Yes.
1031?
I don't think there's an actual amount, but most accountants will tell you about a year.
I thought it would be the opposite.
What?
That if you want to do 1031, you can't hold it for too long. You have to quickly identify a new property and close as quickly as you can.
Well, you have to identify, but the 1031 exchange is for people that own for a long time and they don't want to pay the big taxes. Someone that's a flipper, that's a regular operating business, they're not making that loophole for them. That means you're a business, you're a flipper, and they're not. It's for an investor that's in the long-term market, wants to take, his 8-family or something and turn it into a 32-unit building. This is what the 1031 exchange is. Not for a guy that's buying something, wants to flip it the next day.
I think there's a miscommunication there. I think he was asking about how much time you have from when you sell your property to when you have to reinvest it. But you're talking about
Right.
how long you have to own the property that you bought.
Correct. Correct.
Versus
Correct. Yes. So identifying the property. That's I think.
180 days.
Yes.
I want to ask you a question on behalf of everybody. I just want to point out, I don't know if Barry said this before at the beginning, so we have 3 classes left, okay? The final class, class number 8, is going to be, that's the whole class, how to look for a property. So we're going to have a full class on that one, like what you guys could do as next steps to try to take, so for me doing
Thursday night, right?
that's going to be the Thursday night. The next class is next week, Wednesday. Next week, Wednesday is the last Wednesday class. Then the following week, we're doing Monday, and then Thursday. So Thursday night. What? No, we're gonna with challenge with Kugel and
What days of the month?
I get a calendar.
Which week is we?
Next week. Here, but I just. My calendar. All right. What?
16 and 19.
Is that set in stone, or could you take like
That's it. We're set in stone.
Could you take another vote closer to the time?
No.
That's it?
That's it. We are going to do after Connor, we're taking a break. After Connor, we're going to do like a final, so bottom line. So today is what? Today is the 4th. So next week is the 11th. The following week is the 16th, and then the 19th. But here's a final question I wanted to say. I'm asking this, I don't know if this is on behalf of you. I've been doing this course, this is the 2nd course. We did this 2 years ago also. And what's interesting for me to see, everyone that's in the room is they're hungry, they want to get in and get something. So there's 2 ways to go about it. One way is to actually find the deal yourself and to take it yourself. There's a lot of people that are already doing it, and they take investors, right? Was it LP? What's the term?
Yeah.
Saying there's the main partner and then
Yeah, you're
there's the-
syndicating deals and you take
So I'm saying another way to do it is not necessarily that you have to be the one to find the deal yourself. You can find someone that has a reputation and then get in with them as a silent, right, SP, is that right? As the client.
I mean,
So
I would-
what's your perspective on doing it yourself versus?
I would say, I mean, if you're just starting out, I would say, and you found a deal that you think might be a good opportunity, just practically speaking, I would say is maybe for the first deals, maybe bring it to someone that has experience and try to partner with them, and maybe they can help raise the money and actually help, underwrite the deal. And it's very tough to raise money if you obviously don't have the experience. So I think the first couple of deals are the toughest, just so for your knowledge and to try to get investors to come in. So I think partnering up with someone with knowledge is a very good thing. I mean, you find a great deal, you think something's an opportunity.
How do you prevent them from taking the whole deal from you?
Well, I would say first you try to go to people that you can trust. I mean, that's very important. I would say, in my experience, I try to only deal with people that I trust. And either people out of state that we invest with, or people, any partner I do, I try to stick to people that, that we feel we can trust. I think that's like first and foremost. Otherwise, it's just be a terrible experience and one end involved. So I think I can trust not how much.
What deal do you do, like with partnering, how does it get divided?
Well, it depends. I mean, every structure is different. So I have partners that we do equal 50-50, that will both put in the money, we won't take investors. Then we have deals that, will take investors, and that's structured. Sometimes we give a preferred return on their assets.
How much does one investor get, or
So, I mean, just an example, like I can give you a little example of like an investment, the way it works. I mean, you could buy a building, let's say, for $10 million. Let's say you need $3 million in equity, $3 million, to get into the deal. You're gonna borrow $7 million from the bank. $3 million let's say you get an investor for all the money. Typically, an investor would like to see you put in a little money of your own. Let's say, for example, you put in the investor puts in $3 million. He may want a return on his money, which is called a preferred return. He might want to say, listen, I want to make 5% of my money now. Whatever happens in the deal, I don't really care if it goes up or down, whatever it is. I want to make 5%. So he'll make 5% on this $3 million investment annually. So you pay him out. You can pay him out monthly. You can pay him out quarterly, however you decide. After that, so there's certain ways. Most of the people do is after the investor gets his initial capital back of $3 million, usually the guy that raised the money that syndicates the deal gets anywhere from 25-30%, depending up to 40%.
Usually about refinancing.
Yeah, usually refinancing. Some people take it up front. They'll take a list. They'll go 20-80 day one before the refinance, and the guy can make a 7-8% return. Out of state tends to be a higher preferred return than New York. New York's tougher to give a high preferred return. So, out in one of my investments out, we're getting an 8% return on our money. So it really depends on which market you're in.
Does the preferred return reduce the initial capital?
It does not. No, no. It's called a look back in some scenarios. Usually not. No, a regular preferred return does not reduce the capital.
Anyways, what I wanna do is let's officially end, then whoever wants to huddle, could huddle. We're officially over. Anyone that needs to go, go.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.